Hello, everybody. We are going to get started here in just a minute. While we are waiting, another minute or less, probably less, go ahead and locate the question feature on your control panel. So this feature right here allows you to communicate with us if you have questions or comments throughout. So go ahead and locate that. I will put a chat in here and say good afternoon to everybody. And the other thing is that you are coming in on mute. So this is just to avoid, any audio feedback from lines. So this is just easier. You should be in on the computer, but you also have a phone option if that's easier. So feel free to flip over and dial the number and then put in the access code if you want to connect via the phone. Otherwise, computer works. And be sure to send any questions or comments to us via the question feature. So I'll give it about 30 seconds here, and then we'll go ahead and rock and roll. Okay, I'm not sure that was 30 seconds or not, but I think that we will go ahead and get started. So again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kristen Galden, and I am with Hand to Mind. If you have been on our webinars before, you know who I am. I am just here in the background facilitating the webinar. Heather Jenkins is with us today, and she's going to actually be your presenter. And I'm going to pass things off to her here in just a minute, but I want to go over a couple of logistic things. Again, you are coming in on mute, and you have a question feature in your control panel right here at the bottom where the purple arrow is. Please locate that and you can say hi. There will be a couple points throughout today where Heather asks you questions, and you can submit them in the chat feature or the question feature. So please locate that. Also, if you have concerns or other questions that come up throughout, put them there. We will do a live Q&A at the end and answer some of those aloud. Also, when the webinar, at the end of the webinar, about a couple hours after, you'll get a follow-up email. It does look like it's coming from me, but that follow-up email has two things. It has the recording from the webinar, and it also has the certificate that is included. So the certificate just says that you attended a webinar from Hand to Mind. You can, turn that in and, try to get PD credit. We certainly have teachers that are able to get PD credit. It just kind of depends on what the requirements are for your district. But we will send out certificates, and both of those items are going to be in that one email. If you don't receive, check your spam folder. It often gets filtered out, and it's automatic. So it'll come, I think, 3 hours after the end of the webinar. So I am super excited to pass it off to Heather here. Heather, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter while I launch the poll. Okay, so while Heather is getting going here, I just have one question here that I want to get a feel for, just to see what everybody is doing in terms of your instructional model. So there will be a poll that pops up on your screen, and it's just asking you, what is your current instructional model? Is it hybrid? Is it virtual? Is it in person? And you can answer that in the control panel. Okay. Overwhelmingly virtual. Okay, let me just share these results so that you can see them. So we've got 67% of you are in a virtual model right now. That's really high. So Heather, hopefully that helps gauge where they're at a little bit. You should have control and should be able to share your screen now. There we go.
Let me go ahead. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Heather Jenkins, and I'm going to really quickly turn on my webcam just so you can put a face with the name.
We see you.
And I'm going to turn it off because I'm actually using my phone for audio, so I don't want that to be a distraction. But my name's Heather Jenkins, and I am a development editor for Handson Learning, and I'm really excited today to be speaking to you about remediation and intervention, including tips, tricks, and resources for grades 3 through 5. And prior to becoming a part of the educational publishing world, I spent over 10 years in the public school system as a teacher, specialist, and a district administrator. So remediation and intervention were something that I did on a daily basis because most of my years in the public school system were focused in the area of special education. And I'm very passionate about remediation and intervention, and I truly believe that all of our students can succeed when they're provided with the correct support. So without further ado, let's begin by looking at our overview for our webinar today. We're going to begin by looking at how we can define remediation and intervention, and this will help us to develop a common language for us as we move through our presentation. Then, we're going to look at research and best practices that are related to remediation and intervention. We're going to examine how hands-on learning and various manipulatives can be incorporated into remediation and intervention in both math and literacy. And then we're going to follow up by looking at how we can engage families in bridging the gap. So throughout the webinar, my goal is to provide you with a lot of different examples of maybe problems or situations that might be common in your classroom. And so while the examples that we're going to explore are not all encompassing, my goal is that I would like to provide you with some exemplars of how you might incorporate hands-on learning with manipulatives into remediation and intervention in your classroom. So let's begin by really looking at what those terms remediation and intervention truly mean. I'll start off by saying remediation and intervention are terms that are sometimes used interchangeably, even though they represent two different things. Also, many educators may have slightly different definitions for both terms. And also, depending on the environment that you're in and the student population that you're working with, remediation and intervention might look different from classroom to classroom, school to school, and district to district. So keeping all of those things in mind, let's look at defining remediation and intervention for the purposes of our presentation. So when we think of remediation, I always think of it as reteaching. It's something that corrects the misconceptions and errors that a student may have in their understanding after something that's recently been taught, like at the end of a lesson or a lesson that was completed yesterday or the day before. The need for remediation is often identified through formative assessments, and this might be assessments that the teacher conducts throughout the lesson or at the end of the lesson. Ideally, remediation is done early in the learning process, before the skill is formally assessed or before other subsequent skills are introduced that student might need an understanding of the concept to complete. On the other hand, we talk about intervention. We often think about intervention as providing tiered support. Many of you are probably familiar with response to intervention or the RTI model. Intervention helps us to identify specific skill deficits, and those deficits may be in skills that have been introduced within the past month or quarter, or it could be skills that maybe a student didn't pick up the first time they were taught last year or the year before. And often these skill deficits are identified through formal assessments. Intervention seeks to prevent the learning gap from widening so that all of our students can start making progress toward grade level standards. Intervention also uses research-based instructional practices, and progress is usually tracked regularly over time. Oftentimes, you'll see this in the form of a progress monitoring tool. For the purposes of our presentation, we're going to focus on the common features of both remediation and intervention. So when we look at remediation and intervention, it really begins when that student is initially provided with instruction. And that instruction may be recently, or it may have occurred some time ago. After the student is provided with that instruction, at some point you see that student really needs support. So their need for support is identified. And in response to that, then the teacher provides appropriate instruction and or support. And this could be instruction that occurs over 1 or 2 sessions, that may be the case with remediation, or instruction support that occurs over weeks or months, which might be the case with intervention. As the teacher's providing that instruction and support, they're continuously monitoring and looking at the progress of the student to see if the student is beginning to understand or master the concept. As we engage in remediation and intervention, it's really important that we think about the research and what it tells us about best practices for student mastery of math and literacy skills, standards, and concepts. So when we look at the research and best practices surrounding both remediation and intervention, we can pull out some general considerations for teachers. So the first one is, what are students' needs? When I was in the classroom, if I wanted to look at what a student needs, a lot of times I would look at formative and summative assessments. I might also look at a student's performance on standardized tests, or I might look at the observations or anecdotal notes that I've made while working with the student in the classroom. All the while, when you're looking at student needs, it's important that we think about how we can pinpoint exactly what that student is struggling with in reference to a particular concept. So I might think about, well, does the student have the prior knowledge or the prerequisite skills to be successful with this concept? Or I might think about, is the student struggling with a particular step in a multi-step process? Or are they just struggling to put the steps of this process in order? The more that you can pinpoint that exact area of need, the more focused your remediation and intervention can become. It's also important to consider what setting the remediation or intervention will best be provided. This might be whole group or small group or one-on-one instruction. It's also beneficial to think about what a student positively responds to during instruction. So if you think about when you've seen that student experience success, you might want to think about, well, what materials or instructional strategies were used? You might want to think about how that student chose to show their knowledge, or what really engaged them in that instruction when they were successful. If you can replicate these conditions during your remediation intervention, then there's a greater chance for student success. You also want to consider what instructional strategies and materials will help bridge the gap between what the student knows and the skill or concept that he or she is trying to master, all the while deciding how you're going to look at the student's progress and how it will be assessed and monitored. And sometimes deciding how to approach instruction, including those instructional strategies and materials, can be really difficult when we're thinking about remediation intervention. So to help us kind of think through it, it helps to begin by looking at what we know about how students learn. And we know that students learn through a multifaceted process, and that many parts of their brain are involved as they're learning. Research also shows us that most students often learn by moving from a concrete understanding of a concept to an abstract understanding. So for example, in math, we know that an effective instructional practice is the CRA, or Concrete Representational Abstract Model. In this model, we start with the student understanding a concept at the concrete level. So they might use objects to represent a mathematical concept, like using two-color counters when they're trying to show an addition problem. Then the students move to the representational stage of understanding, and they might use pictures to show that particular problem. So instead of using two-color counters to show an addition problem, they might draw red and yellow dots to show those counters. Then lastly, the student moves to the abstract level of understanding, where they're using numbers and letters and symbols to represent the concept. So in this case, they might use numbers and symbols to write the number sentence, 4 + 2 = 6. In language, we see the same sort of process as a child learns to communicate. Oftentimes, children will first start to communicate by pointing to or grabbing objects, and then they might recognize pictures or photographs or picture symbols of those objects. And then finally, they go on to associate that picture and object with a written or spoken word. We also know that hands-on learning and hands-on learning with manipulatives really increases the motivation and engagement for students during the learning process. It also helps to support meaning making and gives students a deeper understanding of what they're learning. This then allows them to apply their knowledge in new situations more fluidly. In fact, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics has recommended the use of hands-on learning with manipulatives at all grade levels. A lot of times when we're working with students who we're providing remediation or intervention for, it might be because the student is only being presented that information at the abstract level of understanding. So they really haven't had the chance to build connections between what they can touch, see, and experience, and the words, numbers, letters, and symbols on the page. So keeping that in mind, as we work through our presentation, we're going to put that focus on incorporating hands-on learning to help students move from that concrete to the abstract levels of understanding and to help them deepen their understanding of math and literacy concepts. Now, before we move on, I would be remiss if I did not address the current climate that we find ourselves today in education. Since the spring, we have seen a radical shift in how we're being able to provide instruction to our students. And even as our poll today showed, we have a lot of students that are receiving their instruction completely virtually. Some students are receiving a mix of virtual and online learning. Some students are receiving in-person learning, and we're seeing where teachers have to adapt to synchronous and asynchronous instruction as well. So you're probably thinking to yourself, and rightfully so, how on earth can I incorporate hands-on learning in our current reality, which is truly hands-off and 6 feet apart? Well, with some strategic planning and preparation, we can continue to make hands-on learning a part of instruction no matter where a student is. We're going to look at a few tips to help with that. First, if you're teaching remotely, you might consider using a camera to model working with physical manipulatives. So you might use the web camera on your computer, or you could hook up your smartphone to a tripod and show students who may be viewing your lesson online, you could show them how to use the physical manipulatives. If they have their own manipulatives with them, they could then do the same thing. Even if they don't have their own physical manipulatives, it's still beneficial for them to watch as you work with the manipulatives and explain what you're doing. Now, no matter where students are, whether they're in person or virtually, you can always use virtual manipulatives. And I'm going to pull up a website called Braining Camp here. And Braining Camp is a series, or has a series of virtual manipulatives that you can use with your instruction. And on our Handson Learning website, we actually have Braining Camp available for trial and for purchase for teacher and student accounts. So if you look at my screen here, you'll see that this is what Braining Camp looks like when you actually log into it. And it has a series of different types of manipulatives that you can pick for your particular lesson. So for today, I'm just going to pick our base 10 block. When you click on the manipulative, you get a nice work area, and then you're able to drag the manipulatives onto the workspace. You can also write on top of the workspace as well. So if I was giving a lesson to students, whether I was in the classroom and projecting this onto an interactive whiteboard, or I was at home doing some remote teaching, I could use my marker here to draw a problem or write a problem, such as 1,222 divided by 3. And my penmanship is not great with a mouse, so that's the best we can do. All right, once I have this problem up there, then I could actually show students how to use the base 10 blocks to model the number 1,222. I could do this for the students, and the students could log on to their student account and also do this as well. The nice thing about our virtual manipulatives is that when you click on them, many of them, you can change the size, color, orientation, and also you can add it so that the manipulative shows up as transparent. With our base 10 blocks, one of the really great things is that to help model and exchange, you can actually break the blocks apart into changing a cube into flats or flats into rods or rods into units. This then allows you to model how you would physically exchange these blocks when completing a problem. So if I was teaching, I would go ahead and show students how to divide this number into 3 equal groups. And then if I wanted to, I could click the share button and I could choose a link or code that I could send this particular representation to students who may want it for further reference or who may not be able to attend a live session and want something that they can reference. Likewise, students could also choose one of these share options to share a link or copy an image or download an image and actually put it in a chat if you were in a virtual lesson as well. So virtual manipulatives give us a huge benefit when it comes to working in diverse settings for our students. And lastly, we could also provide students with their own sets of manipulatives instead of using shared manipulatives. Unfortunately, in today's climate, we want to minimize students sharing manipulatives so that way everyone can stay healthy. To help us do this, we could provide students with a single set of manipulatives that only they use, or a take-home set of manipulatives that they could have at home if they're doing virtual learning or if they're doing a hybrid model where they might need manipulatives in both places. On our website, we do have single student manipulative kits as well as take-home manipulative kits available for students in grades K through 5. Additionally, we also have some free printable manipulatives as well that students could also print out and use. Now, let's move on to looking at how we can use hands-on learning with manipulatives in the area of math. When we think about math in grades 3, 4, and 5, there are some areas that we frequently address through remediation and intervention. And these include multiplication and division, fractions and decimals, including operations with fractions and decimals, and also geometry. First, we're going to look at ways to use our manipulatives to help model mathematical concepts and problems. So multiplication is an area that many students struggle with, especially multiplication with multiple digits and multiplication where we are regrouping. This might be a problem that a student might see in their math class. There are 6 rows of chairs in the auditorium. Each row has 15 chairs. How many chairs are in the auditorium? Some students might be immediately able to jump to multiplying 15 times 6, but other students might need to begin at that concrete level of understanding. So to help these students, I would use 2-color counters to model this problem. And I would encourage the students to create an array of 6 rows of 15 chairs. This allows them to physically see and manipulate the chairs in the auditorium. It also allows them to help start to look for patterns that might help them solve the problem. For instance, a student might count each row of 15 and add them up, or they might see that 2 rows together is 30, and 30 plus 30 plus 30 is 90. Then after the student is able to construct this using manipulatives, you could then have them draw a picture of the counters or chairs in the auditorium, and then finally move towards them actually using the numbers and symbols 15 times 6 equals 90 to solve the problem. Now, modeling numbers and mathematical concepts in different ways can help students make different connections in their brains. And additionally, there's some students that respond to different types of manipulatives. So here's another way that I also might represent the same problem using base 10 blocks. And the nice thing about these base 10 blocks is not only can I show the 6 rows of 15 chairs using my rods and units, but I also can build in an understanding of place value. So for many students, the concept of regrouping between place values is really difficult. And oftentimes they only see it when we line up numbers and we cross out a number and change its value. They may really struggle to understand that when we're doing that, we're actually taking groups of 10s and exchanging them or composing and decomposing them. So with our base 10 block, I would first have our students lay out our 6 rows of 15 chairs, and then combine them, exchanging units for rods as needed to see that there are 90 chairs in the auditorium. This provides a concrete representation of the problem and also helps them to understand that abstract concept of regrouping. Another type of problem that a lot of students struggle with is long division, especially with and without remainders when we're using that complex process of divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, and repeat. We oftentimes introduce this process using that acronym of divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, and repeat. And this focuses on the steps of the process. But some of our students, they really need to start at that concrete understanding of what it means when we're dividing. Let's say we have a problem like this. A candy store has 325 gumballs. They are stored in 5 candy jars. How many gumballs are in each jar? So if I was working with a student on this problem, I would probably choose to use color tiles and attribute sorting circles. First, I would set out 5 attribute sorting circles to represent the jars. And then I would have students count out 325 color tiles. Then the students could take the color tiles, which represent the gumballs, and evenly distribute them to the different circles. This provides a framework for the student to really understand what they're doing in this particular problem and what division looks like. I could also represent this same problem using base 10 blocks. And this not only allows students to model the division into jars, but it also helps them to see the relationship of place value and division. So I would begin by having the students build the number 325 using slats, rods, and units. Then, through the process of exchanging slats for rods and rods for units, they could then model putting the 325 gumballs into the 5 jars. Another area that students in grades 3, 4, and 5 often have difficulty with is fractions and proportional reasoning. Students often struggle with understanding fractions because they don't really understand the meaning of the numerator and the denominator. They might mix up the two, or they might really struggle to understand the concept of part and whole. So let's say we have a problem like this. Solved value cars has 10 cars on the lot. 6 cars are red, 2 cars are yellow, and 2 cars are blue. What fraction of the cars are red? So for a student who's struggling with this type of problem, I might choose to give them Unilink cubes and have them use the Unilink cubes to show the individual colors of the cars. Then I could have the students group the like cars together. And finally, I could put all of the different color cars together to show one whole, or all of the cars on the lot. Then we could go about talking about the fractional parts of each color. I could also represent the same problem with Cuisenaire rods. So I could use my small 1-unit cubes to represent the 10 cars that are on the lot, and pair that with my rod to show that 10 out of 10, in this case, equals 1 whole. Then I could use my other Cuisenaire rod to show the fractional parts of each color of the car. So I could use my red Cuisenaire rods to show the 2/10 that are yellow and the 2/10 that are blue, and use my teal rod to show the 6/10 that are red. And also, if you're wondering, these are actually the virtual manipulatives from our braining camp as well. So this is what they would look like on screen. Many times, these problems not only ask students to come up with a fraction of a particular set, but we might also ask students to then come up with an equivalent fraction or to simplify that fraction. And oftentimes, this becomes just students memorizing a process or remembering to multiply or divide the numerator and denominator by the same number. So again, the focus is on the process and not really the concept or understanding behind it. So if I had the same problem with solved value cars, and I wanted the student to be able to either simplify the fraction or to give me an equivalent fraction, I might use something like rainbow fraction tiles. And I would have them show me the fraction of the cards that are red, which would be 6/10. Then they could look for the matching rainbow fraction tiles pieces that have a different denominator that would equal 6/10. So in this case, they could show me that 6/10 is equivalent or the same as 3/5. I could also use rainbow fraction circles to show the same thing using the same process. The nice thing about the fraction circles as well is that it does provide a connection to fractional parts and proportional reasoning, like a student might see when they're looking at a circle graph or a pie chart. In the upper elementary grades, students are also expected to move between fractions, decimals, and percents. And sometimes this is really difficult for students to grasp that a fraction and a decimal, both which look very different, can show the same relationship between parts and whole. So to see this relationship, I might use something like our Build-A-Grid. And if I was using the example of the cars, I might have students first color in the different sections to show the fractional parts of each color of car on the car lot. Then, by using my Build-A-Grid, I can easily change out the transparencies and overlays to show that those same parts within the context of a 100 grid. This could help me then lead a discussion about the decimals that are related to the fractions of cars that are red, yellow, and blue on the lot. In geometry, our students in our upper elementary grades often struggle with understanding angles. Some students may struggle with understanding that angles are a part of a circle or understanding what angle measurements mean, specifically the meaning of the word degree. By using our rainbow angle circles, we can show students that angles can be seen as part of a circle. This helps students to understand what the measurements of degrees mean. Also, students are beginning to look at what are acute, right, obtuse, and straight angles. So by having these individual rainbow angle circle pieces, students could easily compare an angle they're looking at to a right or a straight angle to decide if it's acute, right, obtuse, or straight. Students also begin adding angle measurements and begin to explore angle relationships such as complementary and supplementary angles. Our rainbow angle circles allow students to physically put together two angles to see their measurement. So for example, if students were looking at angles of 30 degrees and 45 degrees, they could physically put the pieces together to see that they equaled 75 degrees. Students can also use something like anglegs to help them when making angle measurements or in understanding how the angle of the rays that make up the angle can impact an angle's measurement. Students can use anglegs and actually just connect the little pieces together, and they can also connect it on top of a protractor. They can then practice moving the legs closer together and farther apart to see how that affects the measurement of the angle. Additionally, students can use the anglegs to build different shapes and can then use that protractor to help measure the angles of the shape. Let's say if they're trying to tell the different types of triangles, such as right, acute, or obtuse. Now, in addition to varying manipulatives to help students model a problem, it's also important to think about how you can strategically select manipulatives and other materials to help guide students from that concrete level of understanding to the abstract. And we know, because research tells us, that the role of math manipulatives in math instruction has shown us that students may be able to solve a problem at the concrete level, but then struggle to solve that same problem at the abstract level. So this is where we can look at pairing manipulatives to help us bridge the gap between these different levels of understanding. So let's say that I have Unilink cubes, and I am using them to help a student explore a division problem. After I use these Unilink cubes, I could pair it with the use of our Build-A-Grid to model that same problem in a more pictorial or representational format by coloring in the squares on the board. Likewise, I might use rainbow fraction tiles to show a particular fraction. Then, I might use multiple representation fraction dice to help students see that fraction in different ways. So they might build a fraction with the rainbow fraction tiles and then find the matching representation on the fraction dice, which might be the actual fraction, the fraction on a number line, or it's shown as a colored part of a set. Likewise, if I'm looking at moving the student to understanding a fraction, to a decimal, to a percent, I could also use multiple representation equivalency dice. Again, the student could build the fraction using the rainbow fraction tiles and then find an equivalent representation on the dice using a percent or a decimal or the fraction or a representation of that fraction. Additionally, if I wanted to move further and focus really on the percent piece of it, I could have students build a fraction using the rainbow fraction tiles and then pair that with the magnetic percent bar. And the magnetic percent bar includes a frame and magnetic pieces that can fill in the frame for students to see how fractions and decimals and percents relate. So I could put that fraction and write the different fractional pieces at the top of the bar, and then below it, write the percents that go with each fractional part. Now, we also know that some concepts like operations with fractions and decimals, such as multiplying or dividing, are really difficult to show in concrete or representational form. And when it comes to those types of operations, students really rely on a series of steps that they memorize, and sometimes they don't really understand what the steps actually mean, or even what the answer really means when they multiply two fractions or two decimals. So I would use something like a Build-A-Grid, which helps students to actually visualize the problem that they're doing so that they really understand what each of the numbers means as well as their answer. Guiding students from the concrete to the abstract not only relies on the careful selection of materials, but it also relies on the mathematical conversations and language that we use during our remediation and intervention. And we know that research tells us it's important for students to be able to talk about the processes they're engaged in. And this really allows students to increase their flexibility and their efficiency and accuracy when they're working with numbers. So we have our Math Fluency Intervention Kit that helps students build numeracy skills when they're struggling with core concepts in just 10 minutes a day. This includes number strings and math talks that help engage students in conversations about these concepts. And they also expose students to different mathematical strategies. They cover one of 5 core concepts that include addition and subtraction facts, multiple digit addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, and fractions and decimals. There's also a progress monitoring tool that's included to help you track your students' progress over time. And on the screen here, you'll see an example of a number string. So a number string in this case is one that's looking at adding decimals. And it uses a series of related problems in which the teacher is helping students to talk about these problems and to help them build connections between the problems and develop a broader understanding of the concept. Likewise, this is an example of a math talk that's found in our kit, and it focuses on strategies to add decimals using a number line to help students visualize and model it. So the teacher leads students in talking through this process, and through talking through this process, it helps to assign vocabulary for the students to the steps that they're doing physically on the number line and with the problem. And this again helps them to build that connection between what they can see and touch and the abstract concept of adding those decimals. So what I'd like to do now, before we leave our math section of our webinar, is I'd like you to take a minute And I want you to think about some of the ways that we've talked about using hands-on learning to support math remediation and intervention. And in the chat, I would love if you could write down one thing that really stuck out to you as something that you could do in your classroom, or maybe it was a specific manipulative that you really want to use. So just list some way, what's one thing that you think you could really use in your classroom to help with hands-on learning to support math remediation and intervention. So again, I'll give you a minute to think and go ahead and drop your answer in the chat. Okay, well, hopefully everybody was able to think of at least one thing that they could do to help bring hands-on learning to their math remediation and intervention. And for everybody, it may be something different. Again, depending on the type of classroom that you're in, the population of students you're working with, and your grade level, those hands-on learning manipulatives and strategies might look different for your math remediation and intervention than someone else, and that's completely and totally fine. So let's go ahead.
Hey, Heather, did you want me to read any of those aloud? Do you want me to read any of those aloud?
You know what? If you can, that would be excellent. I'd love to hear some of them.
Okay, so we have used fraction bars to help students see what they are doing and why. The Anglegs and Protractor help see the point of origin so clearly. Lots of great comments about the Build-A-Grid. Is fabulous for multiplying decimals. I can focus on introducing skills with manipulatives first, then move into pictorial and abstract. Let's see. I love the virtual math manipulatives, and I like the Build-A-Grid as a way to move from the concrete manipulatives to the drawing phase.
Awesome. Those are great comments. I'm glad everybody could find at least one thing that they could really use in their classroom. And I'll tell you a secret, I really love the virtual manipulatives and the Build-A-Grid too. So I'm glad a lot of people picked up on those because those are some of my personal favorites as well. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our literacy section. And before we start with literacy, I just want us to recognize that literacy itself is abstract. It really is. We're focusing on word recognition, decoding, and language comprehension. As a student reads, they're engaging different areas of their brain. You know, we start by having our letters that are abstract representations of sounds, and then we combine those letters to make words, and then we combine those words to make sentences, and sentences to paragraphs. So with all that going on, it's no wonder that we have a lot of students that even in our upper elementary grades are still struggling with reading. So when we look at remediation and intervention in literacy, we see some areas that are frequently addressed. And these include phonemic awareness and phonics, vocabulary, comprehension, and fluency. And unlike math, which we just went through, a lot of times we don't necessarily think of literacy as hands-on or something that we actively use manipulatives with. So we're going to begin by examining some ways that we can integrate hands-on learning with manipulatives into literacy remediation and intervention. So to begin to help break down the abstract and complex process of reading, we can start by providing opportunities for reading to become a multi-sensory experience. So I'm not just using my eyes and my ears, but I'm using my hands and my body as well. Even at the upper elementary level, with our students in grades 3 through 5, we have students that still struggle with decoding more complex words. So for our students who struggle with that decoding, we can easily use something like reading rods to help them actually build the words that they're struggling to decode. By building the words and saying each part of a word, whether it's a syllable or a word part, it can help that student to engage their whole body in the reading experience. Students could also do the same thing with color tiles, where they could lay a color tile out either for a syllable of each word, or if the student really needed to still go back and look at that letter sound correspondence, they could do the same thing with individual reading rods or color tiles to the individual letters in a word. So then they could say the individual parts and then push them together as they blend those sounds to make the word. Visual and auditory supports can also help to make reading a multisensory experience. Frequently, students might use highlighting tape or colored overlay strips, or something like our finger focus highlighter, which is on the screen. And this can help students improve tracking and draw their attention to the words as they read. So something like our finger focus highlighter is fairly easy to use when a student's reading. It comes with a ring that students can then pick the color of highlighter that they respond best to and slide it into a little slot on the ring. Then they can put that ring on their finger and physically use that highlighter and move it across as they're reading the words on the page. This again helps with them tracking, and it also reinforces that directionality of reading from left to right. We also know the importance of students being read to and the benefits of students reading aloud. Many students, even in our upper grade levels, who struggle with reading and fluency, benefit from multiple opportunities to read aloud, including repeated reading. So if we let students read the same piece of text during multiple readings, students can gain confidence in their reading, they can focus on self-correction, and they can develop an appropriate reading speed. Something like the finger focus highlighter can support this, because as the student's reading, they're moving their finger and the highlighter across the page. This helps them focus on the words as they're reading aloud, and it also helps to provide that physical connection to an appropriate reading speed, where they're moving that highlighter consistently across the page at an appropriate rate. It's also important for us to model annotating text to encourage reading with a purpose and to improve comprehension. This is something that you can also use the finger focus highlighter for as well. Students can use this in successive readings of a text to highlight key words and ideas as they're reading or answering questions. Now, manipulatives can also play an important role in literacy in helping students to understand the relationships that are found between literary concepts. So we can use colors and shapes and other attributes to help students see these relationships. They're able to see how things like word parts or words and ideas are connected. So for example, if I'm working with students on word parts, such as prefixes, root words, and suffixes, I might choose to use link and learn to model putting those word parts together to make the word. So I might have one link that represents the prefix un, another for beat, and the other for able. And the students can say each word part by itself. Then they can put the links together and say the whole word, unbeatable. I might also choose to use manipulatives like color tiles to show synonyms and antonyms. So if I'm looking at synonyms, I might use two blue color tiles and have the students say the words large and gigantic as they touch them. The fact that both the color tiles are the same color reinforces that large and gigantic mean about the same thing and are synonyms. Then if I'm looking at antonyms, I could choose two different colored tiles, like yellow and red, to have students touch as they say the words enormous and microscopic. Those two colors and the fact that they're different help the student remember that antonyms mean the opposite and they don't mean the same thing. I might also use something like unilink cubes to help me when I'm exploring other relationships such as cause and effect or problem and solution. I can have the student take a unilink cube and hold it while saying the cause that they might have read in a particular piece of text, and then hold another cube in their other hand and say the effect that's related to the cause. Then the students could put those two cubes together to model that relationship and the connectivity of cause and effect. I might also use cause and effect. I could use dominoes to do this as well, or I might use my Lincoln Learns again. In literacy, manipulatives can also be used to provide organizational structures and frameworks to help support a student's comprehension. Oftentimes, students really struggle with expressing their knowledge of events or ideas after they've finished reading. So to lessen that cognitive load, manipulatives can be provided to assist students in organizing their thoughts. So if I'm reading a piece of informational text and a student's really struggling with coming up with the main idea and details of that particular piece of text, then I might use linkage. And I might put them together kind of like a keychain, where that main topic, the student can touch it and say the main topic of that piece of text. And then all the details that are linked onto the main topic or are supported, those students can touch those links as they say specific details that support the main topic of the text. Having the different colors of linkage and showing that relationship that the details support the main topic by having those three detail links linked to the main topic link really helps reinforce how the details support the main topic. I also might have students working on summarizing a piece of text. And I'm sure many of you have seen the framework of somebody wanted but so then as a means to help our students summarize something that they've read. Here I might pair that with different colored unilink cubes. So the students can either build this tower beforehand and touch each cube as they say the different parts, or they might actually stack the cubes and make the tower as they go through somebody wanted but so then. I might also have students use pattern blocks if they were trying to tell about the story elements in a story. So I could use different shaped pattern blocks to represent the different story elements, like characters, setting, and events. Here I've used the hexagon and the trapezoid to represent the characters and setting, and I've used 3 green triangles to represent the events. That way, when a student is telling me about these elements, they can touch each block and they can go about telling me the characters, setting, or events. To assist teachers in providing hands-on literacy support for students, we actually have a small group kit called our Close Reading Small Group Kit. And this kit is for students in grades 3 through 5. And it provides some differentiated lessons, model text, and a variety of annotation tools that can be used while students are reading the text. These kits are available in literature and poetry, as well as informational text. So this would be a kit that you could use either in your remediation or intervention, and specifically if you're working with a small group of students. Now, before we end our webinar, it's really important that we explore how we can engage families in the remediation and intervention efforts that we're doing in our classroom. So research shows that when families are actively involved, students are more engaged and they're ready to learn at school. Additionally, we know that when intervention, it's likely to be more successful when the parents are involved than when they're not involved. And we're also seeing that it actually provides longer lasting results when those parents are involved after the intervention ends. The simple fact is that many of our parents really want to be involved in their child's learning, but they might feel like they lack the resources or the knowledge to do so. So what can we do to encourage families to be involved in remediation and intervention at home with their students? Well, let's look at a couple simple things that we can do. First of all, we can view the homeschool relationship as a partnership. And I'm sure that many of you already view this relationship as a partnership. It's really important for us to not only view that as a partnership, but to communicate that we view this as a partnership to our parents. To let them know that we want them to be involved in their child's education. One way that we can do this is by providing frequent communication about student progress. So this could be something where we're contacting the parent every week or every month, and we want to make sure that we communicate the successes that the student is having, along with maybe the challenges that we're working with the student and with their family. We also want to consider any barriers to communication and involvement and how to remediate them. So for some of our families, this might be a language barrier. So we might have to look at ways that we can provide materials so that parents can support a student using their native language. Additionally, some families might not be able to communicate via internet, so we might need to do something where we're calling parents or we're using handwritten notes or another form of communication. Additionally, we should look for ways that we can provide families with concrete and manageable activities that they can do at home to support any remediation or intervention. So when I do remediation and intervention with students, I've always thought about, is there something that I could send home for a parent or a guardian to do with a student that could reinforce what I'm doing here, but maybe could just take 5 or 10 minutes, like a game or a quick activity that could help them feel a part of the learning process and reinforce at home what we're learning at school. We've actually developed some learning at home kits that we hope will help our families to feel a part of the learning process. Our Handson Standards Learning at Home Math Kit and our Learning at Home Literacy Kit and our Learning at Home Cross-Curricular Kit are specifically made to help engage families in learning at home. Each kit, Math and Literacy, provides 6 weeks of hands-on standards-aligned activities, 6 games, a parent calendar, and all the manipulatives that are needed to complete the activities and games. The cross-curricular kit features both the math and literacy kit, so it has a total of 108 hands-on math and literacy activities and 12 games. All of our materials that are key materials are also provided in Spanish as well. So that way, hopefully all of our families can engage in learning at home. So providing remediation and intervention can really seem like a daunting task. But by including the use of hands-on learning through manipulatives, we can really help students make connections in meaningful ways and help them move to a deeper understanding of math and literacy concepts. Before we end our webinar today, I want to thank all of you for just being a part and being there for our students, especially in this difficult time that we find ourselves in. And with that, we are going to move towards any questions that you may have, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen.
Thank you. We have had a lot of great comments. We don't have a lot of questions. We do have a question about virtual manipulatives and whether or not they are free. There is a demo account. The link is in the chat box or in the question feature. It's handtomind.com/brainingcamp. If you go there and sign up, there's a button that says, sign up for a demo account or something like that. You can sign up there. I think it's a 60-day demo, and that is a student and teacher, so you can sort of get the whole experience. There is a share feature there where students can share work. So I encourage you to go there and check it out. Heather, great job. Thank you for such a great walkthrough today. I do have to announce the winner. So we are going to give away a magnetic demo Build-A-Grid, and let me just make sure I have the name correct here. The winner of that is Rochelle Sussman. So Rochelle, just reply to the webinar email and send me your address so that I can send that out to you. Yay, it's always fun to win things. We just want to say thank you guys to everybody for attending. As a reminder, you'll get the follow-up email this evening. and it will include both the recording and the certificate. So if you have any questions, reach out to us. We're happy to help. And again, Heather, thank you. That was great.
Thank you all.
We hope everybody has a, yes, you too. Thanks, guys.